Just by quick introduction, everybody, thanks for joining today. John Cogswell here, a member of the board of NECCF, and I'm just going to turn it over quickly to Dave Teixeira, who's also on the board, who's going to be, kind of setting the tone for the day. And also, I'll be monitoring chat, so please, questions in chat, and we'll probably have a period at the end for questions as well. So, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm Dave Teixeira. I'm on the board of the NECCF with John, and thank you for attending our webinar today. I have Marcel Barrera on the call with me. Marcel is one of the founders of ServiceMob, and a couple things we're going to address today. A few things we're going to address today. The webinar is about forecasting and how it's changing and why it's important to pay attention to the changes, and some of the things that ServiceMob is doing to help with those changes that are out there in the industry today, I think are going to help us a lot. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Marcel, and we're going to cover forecasting. We're going to cover what's going on, and we're going to cover use cases on why it's important, what the return is that you get out of doing things a little differently. And we're going to have a Q&A. John has the chat open, so if you have any questions as we go, please put it in chat. If you want us to drill down a little bit on a slide that we're on, just type in DD, and we'll have an open Q&A at the end of the webinar.
Awesome. So Dave, thanks for that tee-up. So thanks everyone for joining. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at ServiceMob. So pleasure to meet everyone here. I'm going to be talking to you guys around how we think about the customer experience, especially as it relates to what we think about the customer experience when it comes to the contact center and its relationship to forecasting. I think this is a very practical use case in terms of where businesses want to go. But I'll start off with a very facetious question. So, maybe Dave, riddle me this. I think everyone who talks about the customer experience typically talks about it from the perspective of a feeling, right? I don't know of many others. They want to improve the customer experience, right? But I haven't really heard anyone say, I know what the customer experience is. It's X, Y, or Z. Do you have a definition maybe in your head of what you would think the customer experience is?
I'm a very practical person. So I'm probably not a feelings person. So to me, it's if they can answer my question quickly and get me what I need quickly, then that's what I'm looking for. Everything else, the experience itself, is it good or bad? That all is very important as well. But it's really it's solving the problem quickly the first time.
I love it, right? Solving my problem quickly, right? And I think largely what we've done is we've surmised things in cases, in chats, right? But we don't contextualize things as an experience. And that's a very real thing. The level of effort, as you mentioned, that it takes for you to solve your issue. What data set do we have out there that allows us to see that? How many experiences we have? How many contacts it takes to solve our most painful experiences? Understanding the relationship and the data is really important when it comes to what contacts are being loaded in and the algorithm that's using them. For what it's worth, I think largely we know today that workforce management systems, very integral part of the contact center ecosystem. I want to be very transparent there. But when it comes to this notion of understanding the experience, that's not a piece of the puzzle that it contextualizes, because that happens over many systems, because there's more interactions that happen on other channels that maybe not WFM is aware of. And as such, we find ourselves in this predicament. And I think the problem is that enterprises have largely relied on random traffic models to understand demand. And what I mean is we all have heard this lovely mathematical term for years called Erlang C, right? We've all heard it. We all know that it's a part of our ecosystem when it comes to forecasting. But that practicality of looking at the moving average is all we've done for 40 years. We have not interpolated data from outside of the four walls of the contact center as a predictive indicator, right? That is telling us that we are going to get more contacts. These experiences are going to happen. And I think that the industry has largely been spoon-fed a lot of stuff from the big tech gurus out there. So we've relied on cases and tickets. I think in workforce management, you've even seen a shift, unfortunately, to that spectrum of forecasting cases and tickets versus still focusing on how many contacts we're going to receive. Cases and tickets are outcomes. And because of that, there's a one-to-many relationship with your case, ergo your experience you will have with a company. That's going to take a tremendous amount of effort to understand. Outside of that, there is this notion that I spoke about across many industries. If you thought about software companies largely use revenue growth in terms of their forecast. They'll look at that in terms of users. In gaming industries, so think of, for those of us parents out there, Fortnite, Roblox, these gaming console or games themselves, they're probably looking at DAUs, daily active users, and engagement hours. As a way to determine, what does that volatility look like in terms of usage of the product. But there's very little correlation or causation in terms of modeling that's done there to figure out how we get past this problem of running hot. And I say running hot usually means we're 15 to 30% overstaffed. So, Dave, I think there's no shortages of opportunities, right, out there in terms of what companies are trying to tackle today. And what we know to be true is that there's, AI is out there and everyone is hearing it. And as we continue to look for more use cases and ways to utilize the data of service, as we look for more ways to optimize and reduce our frontline staff, I think that's a very real question is being asked of support leaders in this way. Maybe, Dave, if you thought about some of the challenges you're hearing when it comes to the contact center operation, is it still the challenge of, how many, butts and seats do we really need? And is it still a challenge of, yes, we're still relying on just spreadsheets to do a lot of what we need to?
It's a little bit of everything. The business is changing quickly too, so I think it's tough for leaders to keep track of all the changes that are going on in the center. There's a lot of part-time requirements, busy hour requirements, off hours requirements those are the toughest to forecast and plan for. And that's probably where you see most of that, 10 to call it 25% over staffing. Because that's a significant number if you're running a large center.
100%. I think, what we know to be true too is on top of all of this ambiguity that you bring about in terms of where that could lie in terms of data. The other aspects we know is that operating a contact center is extremely difficult today. There is a Frankenstack of technologies that are out there, right? And so when it comes to how businesses utilize the data of service and the number of systems they have to tie that together, there's an extremely high reliance today on cases and tickets. We're not using demand predictors. There's really unrealistic targets that are being set as well, where we find enterprises using SLAs and constraints that likely may not be realistic to achieve and or have a higher cost to serve, but have no detail or data around that to be able to understand, hey, we do not need to operate at these levels. And so with the Frankenstack as it exists, and trying to understand that customer experience, there's a lot of things that are happening in the technology stack today. We've introduced automation in a variety of ways, from automated QA, agent assist. We're doing things today with knowledge management, where yes, we're using bots to handle interactions based off of that. But that still provides a lot of systems and a lot of disparity in the data models that you have there. And so understanding all of that across your ecosystem is largely been left to you as a business user to define for the analytics team how to look at that data. And what that has done, unfortunately, has resulted in the same metrics being utilized. We still use service level. We still use, occupancy. We're still using schedule adherence. We're still using all of these metrics to maintain an efficiency. I would say that to optimize that, you need better data. And what we know to be true is most workforce management systems, as they exist today, struggle to deal with growth, struggle to deal with disparity of demand. I think if we recall correctly, our times of COVID and then after COVID and growth stage businesses that continue to emerge, the level of data that they're producing across all of these systems, there's no one system that's really looking at that data to say this is an experiential block. This is an experiential lens by which many metrics can be drawn. And that's because they're missing this piece. They're missing the data ontology. Fancy word, guys, for data model. It's just the real world application of what we're studying is how businesses use their data, what channels they come in on, who are the key active actors in that situation as it pertains to service and support. Your agent, the customer, sometimes users, and there's a difference. There's, the product or service you're calling about. There's a channel you come in on, and there's the stages and phases of your support. If you were to thread the data ontologically across all of those interaction types and stages and phases of support, you would draw into very specific systems around your customer, the contact, the product, the user. All of those would have systems they would map to, and there would be metrics, attributes, indicators that are needed. Defining that with the exhaustiveness of how an experience looks is something that from a framework perspective is what's missing for us to understand how that can be optimized in workforce management as an example. So the way we're applying our ability to look at this data is to say, if you can model the data of service correctly, you should be able to see the customer experience, how many contacts it takes to solve that experience on any given channel. You should be able to see if they're channel hopping. You should have better equilibrium in understanding what causes that contact demand. So, things we spoke about earlier, which is daily active users, engagement hours for gaming companies, for travel and hospitality, that's probably book nights or intra-night stays. Maybe for, an airline company, it's going to be how many tickets we plan to sell, how many seats we plan to sell. There's going to be a lot of data out there that we want to use. But David, I'll ask a question. How easy do you think is it for those VPs today to get that data in order to be able to model that? How often do we see that data being shared with those teams?
I'm going to guess it's not very frequently.
That's very true. It's not that frequent, right? And so what ends up happening is because we get infrequency of data, we largely have spreadsheets, monolithic spreadsheets. And I'm sure every WFM manager has their chocolate and coffee moment every day where they're amalgamating, they're picking up, they're hearing on the floor, they're calling someone, they're asking, they're coordinating across sites. But what that does in the end is still has incomplete, inconsistent, and inaccurate data. Now, look, don't just take my word for it, right? You could take the word of I would say, Gartner, who says, look, most tools rely on historical contact patterns. Think about that. With you deploying AI, with you trying to create a channel frequency where you want to make it, i.e. cheaper for cost to serve, and largely people say that's chat. I'd argue if you don't know what your check concurrency rate is, I don't know. And frankly, I haven't seen many companies do better than 1.5 chats per hour or per transaction handled by agent. In other words, their average throughout the days, they handle 1.5 chats. It's hard to get to 2 or 3 unless it's really basic queries. And at that point, why aren't you using AI? But if you are, and if you are doing these things, these historical patterns are breaking. They're breaking because the patterns by which customers and who you market to and who that customer is at the end of the day is changing. And so we know that that's a blocker for WFM. So what does that make us do? It makes us ride hot. We have to ride hot. We have to staff to peaks. We don't staff to valleys, and we can't staff to averages. We have to staff to peak because we can't use peanut butter at the end of the day to smooth out that contact curve. McKinsey, right? Traditional contact center forecasting depends on historical patterns, but very much the high variability, the complexity of the journey, that largely is something that is missing. And so if we don't understand how many contacts, how painful those complex journeys are, how do we account for that labor need in our environment? Now, yes, you likely want to mitigate and prevent those experiences, but until then, and considering the number of, repeats that exist in the world of contact centers today, it's hard to believe that we would be able to get out of this with just AI handling interactions. We have to do a better job of modeling that data. And again, I think across the board, as you can see, the one thing that is consistent is it's very much around rolling averages, maintaining the consistent state. And I would say something like up top, the mean absolute percentage error and R squared. So your statistical confidence in explaining the correlation and causation of your contact demand. That is a big problem. Now, the mean absolute percentage error is something that's typically used, guys, in forecasting of finance. Think about, your finance team probably is where you would want to get data from largely, because that's going to be a predictive indicator for how they anticipate growth. Growth in your company is very important. Engagement on a platform is very important. And you have to draw a relationship and understand which of those is the best lead indicator to use against your contact traffic. So with that said, when we think about understanding that relationship, we believe that if you quantify this experience as a data model, now you can see things that largely have been obfuscated for service and support. I will bring in a channel as an example. Because of how we model experiences and how we think about customer experience, right? One of the things that's very interesting is that most email forecasts, as an example, are all about anticipating the inbound email. But none of the transaction time of reading the email, going through and processing that transaction, taking the knowledge article, confirming things, looking at the account, all of that happens on the outbound. So we should be forecasting outbound emails because those responses require our FTE's labor to produce. How do we see those experiences? How do we look at that? How do we create a mean average of time, knowing that for the most part, email AHT just doesn't exist, right? I'll give you another one. There's companies out there that use messaging versus chat. Messaging is a distinct different data model. Intercom is very, one of those that is out there. The thought of forecasting messages is ambiguous. It's ambiguous too because there's no abandonment rate, right? How do you understand how you're servicing and how to service better on a messaging platform? We have to understand what a block of an experience looks like. You have to understand how much time it took to interact across that block, and building those blocks in a way to see them, to tell where you are abandoning, is not easy unless you can experientially understand that data set. So being able to create a better forecast for email, lower effort on the channel, we're staffed better, staffing on messaging. Those two channels today, I would say, is where, Dave, maybe you tell me, I think a lot of companies have disparity where they're using messaging versus maybe a consistent chat platform.
Depends on the industry too. So it depends what they're doing, but yeah, I would agree 100% with that.
Yeah, and the one thing that's difficult for all of us in in terms of forecasting, this notion of truly understanding what's going to drive contact demand. Once you have that variable, that's kind of your superhero power. You can take that and now apply that to how much effort it takes to meet customer demand from a business perspective. So I do want to talk about some interesting use cases here, because on the front end of this, we are at a very interesting time. Executives are asking questions that are very bespoke now in terms of how they think about modeling their contact center. And what I would say is that today, if you were to think about targeting an abandonment rate, that would be something you could do if you could see all of your contacts. And that's what these are. Each of these dots here is a contact for a voice interval, right? So on a channel, we could see all the calls that were happening in a voice interval. And you can see this best fit statistical line that's drawn on the graph to say, if we were to tightly cluster and we wanted to see how many contacts we were going to abandon, essentially what you're seeing, if I targeted a 5% abandonment rate, that means I would likely mitigate all the contacts to the right. I could answer those in a much more significant amount of time. But to get to that and do so successfully, how many seconds should my SLA be? What percentage of the time I should hit that? That's the second graphic on the right. And what we're showing is, look, now because we can see the experience, we can see all of the contact clustering, we can see that best fit line. What we can see is to target a 5% abandonment rate, this client would need an SLA of 70% in 64 seconds or less.
Hey, so, Marcel, just
yeah.
a quick interruption. I'm not seeing the screen share. Are you screen sharing? Is that your intention?
I am screen sharing. It says you are sharing screen. Dave, are you seeing the screen?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my bad.
No worries. So from the perspective of ASA and service level, it's a question of what if scenario building that I think is difficult to answer in workforce management. What if I wanted to target an 8% abandonment rate, what would my SLA need to be? If I wanted to target a higher abandonment rate, if I could see, as you could see here, look, targeting 5% may be best industry average, but you could see that people really don't start abandoning. That's what the degrees of separation are, right? Until they're hitting, like, look at the clustering, right? Around here, around 500 seconds. That's a long time. That's a high wait tolerance, okay? You would need to target that, but do you have to is a separate question, right? And if you model that experience and you're able to understand exactly how many calls are going to come in on a given week, now you have a smoothing out of that contact curve. Now you have better proximity to what your SLA should be. What is the customer's wait tolerance? What are those targets, and how should we think about applying ourselves from a block and tackle perspective of staffing? Do we need a 4x10? Do we need part-time queues? As you mentioned, part-time model. Would it work for us on a specific shift? How do we staff that better? All of these questions can get answered as you start to model that experience in your data. Look, I think workforce management teams want to do the best by the business, right? It's not that they're not trying their best. I just think they've been dealt, unfortunately, a card of a lot of smooth the average, use what we have, not a lot of inputs from the exterior, not a lot of algorithms used, right? A lot of it is just using that moving average and staffing to peak. But let's say you can get it right. If you can get it right, how can it work? The real truth is that I think, how you apply AI today to make your tools faster and better is largely where I think we're going. Think of companies like this one may have a tough brand, but DuPont, right? DuPont doesn't make anything, right? Their quote unquote, tagline is "We make your products better." A lot of what's happening and what we're seeing companies today do is use AI in that similar way. If you have someone who can manufacture data, we're a data manufacturer. We manufacture experiential data, right? We refine data to experiences, then you can forecast those. If you're able to do that, then you're able to reduce the operational drag it takes for you to meet staffing requirements. We typically run anywhere from 95% plus or minus 5% on average, or plus or minus 3% on an intra-week. That forecasting capability is really, really important today, where I think teams are saying, hey, we're deploying AI. We're going to have it handle X contacts. How do we factor that into our forecast, and how many people do we need? Obviously, there's some performance you'll want to get out of that first, but then incorporating that into your forecast is something that you'll need to do. Those are pieces of the puzzle I think that still are largely difficult for enterprises today. Dave, if you thought about maybe an environment that is growing in your network of maybe industries, are there industries today that you would say are fastest growing in terms of support? Have you seen anything change?
The biggest changes I've seen by industry, I would say, is healthcare. Calls are getting longer, they're getting more difficult, they're more specialized. The advent of retail healthcare, you've got your doctor's office, your eye doctor's office, your anesthesiologist's office. Their contact center complexity is growing exponentially. Especially when you get at just questions about your insurance, billing, scheduling, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, 100%. And look, understanding member growth, if you're in rev cycle, if you're in appointments and bookings and you're trying to ensure patient outcomes with adherence to that, and there's follow-up outbound, getting the right mix of understanding front office activities and bookings, member growth, all of those components that are, again, forecasted on the exterior to the contact center, not necessarily incorporated, likely draw in a lot more from the perspective of rework that we would see in the center. The other aspect I would say is, look, if you can get this right from a forecasting perspective, you can really mitigate the number of agents that you'll have on staff. So we use, for a travel hospitality company, first started with book nights. That was good. But it wasn't as clean in terms of a predictive indicator. The aspects that you're doing really is you're using what they call regression. Regression analytics is going back in time and utilizing your model to say, I want it to forecast using the data that existed to see if it came close to what actually happened. We were doing that with a variety of algorithms with our data set, but found that intranight stays was something that changed the game. And so by modeling that with the experience, we were able to successfully mitigate over 230 FTEs in terms of headcount requirement. Now, that headcount requirement was thought to be because of expansion and growth. We would need more FTEs. We saw things in the data too around, hey, these are your top painful experiences. If you take care of that, but really plan for this from a contact curve, you'll be okay. That staffing globally across a BPO environment and variegated network still was able to achieve the service levels that they wanted, still was able to hit CSAT numbers without any issues. So when we think about the customer experience, right, and we think about modeling it as a data model, I think the truth is that most enterprises are struggling with this today because of the sheer amount of data that exists. I'll go back to this because I think it's really important, right, which is that, measuring service experiences is hard. WFM wants really good inputs. They don't want to use just the moving average. They probably have more than a gut feeling, but expressing that to get to the top echelon of performance with AI today is difficult. So I think that as enterprises shift their focus from maybe looking inward, and I think that a lot of enterprises are still doing that. You're going to have to find a better data model. He who wins in the world of AI has the most prestigious and cleanest, enriched, contextualized data. That data today is just it's bad in all respects across enterprise systems. We've done a great job of federating data. So for those who are not familiar, federated data marts are things like Snowflake, Redshift, Databricks, Azure Cloud Hosting. These are all environments where we've learned to like kind of wrap our arms around data. We have not been able to say, how can I look at that data differently? What can we use to get to use cases where we could model that experience and target it differently, and we can get to different use cases. So what we've also done, in terms of how we think about that experience, I would say is it's not just forecasting that you can get better at. It's doing this with economies at scale. So, we do offer forecasting as a service. Think about it again. Like I said, people who can make your data better, people who can use your data, refine it, and then interpolate that into a better interaction with your customers, right? That's something that we provide. So that's just experiential forecasting. Something that comes with that, though, is we do look at shift optimization, right? So think about, not just the inherent traffic that's coming in and how do we experientially forecast it? What is the right shift patterns that we need? And then, as mentioned, because we use statistical models and algorithmic ways of forecasting that experience, you'll get to see in your interface and decide which model you want to use. You get to see again, that mean absolute percentage error. That's really important in determining what algorithm you want to use to help forecast your contact demand. And then from there, yes, Erlang C is utilized in your scheduling software to put butts in seats. Often we find that most of our customers stop at shift optimization because they have a workforce management and they're like, hey, we're going to do this. Give us the forecast, and then we're going to put in our workforce management. Our NOC will get that out to teams across the globe. But we do a what we call a variegated operation management situation here, where we take internal and vendor resources and we optimize against that. So we could be your WFM resource if you need that as a muscle. So essentially, we would do all of it. So that means scheduling, managing the vendor, allocating contact demand, providing you all the statistical confidence and why that is, going the way it's going in terms of allocation strategy. Could also give you dominant channel analysis and greenfielding analysis, right? So think about emerging channels, right? If you're about to open up SMS as a channel, we can help you figure out what the staffing required for that is. If you think about a lot of brands today, I would think, David, emerging channels and trying new channels is probably something you hear a lot about. Would love to hear maybe how your customers are thinking about that too. Are you seeing a more channel adoption or more maybe channel, widening in terms of we want to capture more customers to come through here?
A lot more channels, and they're limited by what resources they can provide to handle those channels too. I find this whole discussion interesting because we're talking about forecasting, but it all starts with data, and the data leads to knowledge, and the knowledge leads to processes. So, what we're really talking about here is, I think, is the ability to forecast for certain processes. And you mentioned it in one of your slides earlier. You can target your forecast in a sense that you can go back to your product teams and your marketing teams and say, hey, if we fix these processes, this is what I'm forecasting. We're handling our customer experiences with these processes. If we fix these processes and make them easier, we can fix our experiences and probably grow revenue and make customers happy and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
100%. And look, it's important to note, right? Everyone does run hot. How hot you run, sometimes it's just a cost constraint, right? You may be understaffed by intention, just because, hey, we just don't have budget, we can't staff up, and so they're looking for strategies for AI to handle contacts. They're trying to mitigate calls and chats. Modeling that experience is going to help you to understand that and equalize your labor pool at the same time. I think, right now, I would say what we're hearing senior executives say is, look, the economy itself has a constraint, right? We're a consumer-based economy. And as such, in times of uncertainty, most contact centers are looking for efficiency gains in the here and now. Staffing is probably the low fruit on the low hanging fruit on the tree, I would say. But again, it's the intent that you put behind it. The data that you're looking at to contextualize is largely going to inhibit you from an enterprise perspective to get there. So if you can't get those layers refined, again, to see that experience, measure your service experience end to end, you're going to deal with the lack of connectivity to what's happening in your contact center. And look, I think the other thing, and I might get an amen out there if someone watches this later, which is, I think sometimes VPs, SVPs are told, well, we're going to deploy X. That should take 2 minutes off AHT, right?
That'll fix it.
That'll fix it. Hey, we're going to do this, and that's going to fix it. So you won't get those calls no more. And they get forced to model it that way, and they're told to update the model that way. I think we got to quit trying to put support, which is maybe a square peg in a round hole. The overall view is that you can't just staff your way to success, but if you have better forecasting data, if you have better connectivity to the things that are going to cause support demand to begin with, well, by God, you should have better reliability and consistency of your forecast, because based off of how many members are going to be, what does member growth look like, how many book nights you may have, how many tickets you may have. All those things are important. Using cases, I want to go back to this. Cases are outcomes. Cases don't have AHT. Cases are documentation of an interaction. Contacts are important. Maybe the one thing I'll ask you, Dave, and I think this is probably true too, maybe for a word to the wise. Do you have customers, or have you heard of customers saying, well, we work on emails while we're staffed on the phone channel in between calls? Have you seen that applied as a tactic?
Not so much lately, but
Okay, good.
That's a thing. And chats and emails and WhatsApps and everything else.
I'm not alone. That's it. Exactly. And guys, if you're...
It's not very efficient. It's hard to forecast.
And the reason it's hard to forecast is because the laws of that algorithm, or rather the
lack thereof.
The lack thereof, right? The lack of an algorithm, and then adding the Erlang C and the forecast in that channel depends on nothing else happening on that channel but calls, right? Everything else is shrinkage. That's what that forecast is for. It's to say, okay, if you're going to staff the phone channel, here's how many butts in seat you need. Here's how many calls they're going to take and when they're going to go to break. Here's all the things you need to manage that. To convolute that with the absorption of a channel, how do you account for what you did? And if it's email, in between calls, it never happened. Because in order to be available for the call, I guarantee you're not available on the call and not taking an email. Those two are happening at the same time because that's what it's expecting, right? When you think about your percentage of occupancy, the percentage of occupancy is totally on, are you available or are you occupied? That's what that's supposed to mean. And if you're those two things, it means you're not doing anything else. So Dave, to your point, you're not working on SMSs, you're not working on chats, you're creating, and I think that's the other thing I'd like, contact center leaders to think about it, is that you are creating operational drag and dark data around you by doing that. If you have an email channel and it needs 10 people, wouldn't we want to know that? Isn't it better to know we need 10 people just on email than to have 40 people working emails in between calls? That doesn't seem right. And I guess once you do that, you're going to see that, wow, we didn't need 40 people on the phone either. And if we did, that tells us that we were using our labor ineffectively. So Dave, a little bit of partaking of knowledge there at the end here for me, right? I think, that's pretty much the dog and pony show from ServiceMob. Again, when it comes to, experientially forecasting, Dave and I have done this together. We want to do this for others. We see plenty of opportunity for others out there to forecast with experiences. And again, get that quick cost savings to understand where your inefficiencies are and optimize for that experience at the end of the day.
Well, and what's great about paying attention to this is a way that orgs can get better without causing a huge disruption operationally either. Because forecasting better doesn't mean you're hiring, firing, changing processes. It just means you're forecasting better.
Exactly.
And then you can make those decisions if you need to.
100%. So, again,
any questions?
Yeah. So guys, we got, somebody had to jump off, but you got a lot of affirmation. Just said great conversation, directly applicable to my current situation and med device covering the globe in multiple languages. Talk about additional complexity, Marcel, right?
100%.
So really appreciate the conversation. You got an amen at one point. I think that was about, kind of giving the operational people more visibility, I think, or credit in the organization. And then some affirmation as well about, the mixing of channels, oh, hey, while you're doing, which is the classic with a call center, right? Hey, there's a bunch of people there. Let's have them do this clerical work, let alone taking on, a mixture of phone, SMS, or whatever else they might, emails, whatever else they may take on. One of the thoughts that I had, Marcel, maybe you could comment on is, sort of things people can do organizationally. So it was great you mentioned finance, right? So there's an obvious partner that perhaps, the contact center folks might not think of sitting down with periodically. But even in addition to them, thinking about the sales function, maybe even those that are managing the retail or brick and mortar part of the world, right? And I was kind of just thinking, is this kind of an opportunity to kind of create a monthly, customer experience prediction group where everybody's sort of sharing in the notion of, hey, here's a data element I look at, that kind of thing. So just interested in your comments on that.
Yeah, I think, a couple pieces of the puzzle, right, as I see the chat coming in. I think that there's a lot around contact center workload that we tend to think of as like there's so many parts of the day that we can fit work in. One, burnout is real. Occupancy should, change, I think, in this world. And look, in a remote contact center, understanding this world of, how effective are we at truly staffing and optimizing for contact demand today is ambiguous. I would say everything from things that I'm seeing in the chat right now around outbound and being able to think about outbound in the perspective of, are there correlations or causations to inbound work that denote more outbound work? Is there a cause and effect relationship to our outbound work via a marketing campaign, via an ad spend, via X, Y, and Z? Some of those things are done as we expect percentages. Nothing is done in terms of like, let us use your forecasted response rates for campaigns that are like this, modeled that run on the East Coast. That's not done, especially if it's going to be an outbound campaign to do that mixed set of dials. And then, how you load that in from a predictive or a power dialer with your inbound set, all efficiency gains can be made. But with proximity again to, do we know how many contacts it takes to solve an experience? Do we know how many contacts it takes to convert, to book, to X, Y, and Z? Those things that you use as factors for contacts per, those are all things you have to factor in your forecast model, because those have exponential value and extrapolative value to your ability to staff. I think, at the time of someone else mentioning concurrency, look, I've seen people, in Salesforce dev shops, if you look, they're still trying to figure out how to get to chat concurrency. Average offered per accepted chat is an interesting metric. Think of how many chats an agent, turns away on average while they're on a chat. Understanding that is important as an input to how you staff on that channel. Concurrency in terms of predicting and incorporating that rather than just dividing it by 3, right? Or by 2. Those are things you have to think about too. That's something in workforce management software, trying to hit some of these questions. In workforce management software, when you get your chat forecast and you put it in, or it uses it and has an average for you, remember that at the interval level, that 2 to 3 units is a divide summary at the interval level. It's understanding how many 3 concurrent chats can you forecast. Getting that data set will help you too. I think each have, to your point, different KPIs and ASAs and service levels. Those pieces of the puzzle, to me, is where we tend to see growth stage businesses tend to say, well, we're just going to do everything together, which is not fun, not easy, and results in more headcount. I think this thing I go back to of separating key groups, chat, email, voice. Not saying agents can't rotate and go through, but maintaining staffing levels appropriately against those independently so they only do those tasks. I've seen only good success out of that. So long-winded, apologize for that response, but hope that helps with some of the questions we had in the chat.
Yeah, and Marcel, it's interesting, just you'd commented earlier on in the presentation about, looking realistically at SLAs, right? And there's been some shift there, the old, 80% within 20 seconds. Again, it depends on industry, all that stuff. Is it sales versus service? All those dynamics that need to be taken into account. But it's also, I think sometimes I found in environments reminding people that some of these channels are what I refer to in operations parlance as just-in-time processing. A phone call is a great example of that. Whereas an email obviously is something that I don't want to say defer in a negative way, but can be delayed in terms of response and still be acceptable to the consumer. And so just even understanding basic things like that in terms of differentiating how one manages or sets SLAs, I think is so important.
100%, 100%. And look, you getting those variables consistently and using them for your model is critical. Knowing which algorithm to use and ensuring that you have the most contextualized data, 100% needed. That enrichment, I think, will draw people to see immediate change in their headcount requirements. Now, look, can the inverse be said? Yes. If you're already understaffed and you start doing this, I would not expect you to come back to me and say, we need even less. I would expect you to come back to me and say, oh, poop, we need way more. We didn't know how many more. Thank you for telling us that. And that's been the case too, where it's helped to, again, I think service can protect revenue if done correctly. In this case, if you have to staff up, I'm pretty confident that it can. All right. Any other questions or thoughts from the team?
Just one quick announcement too. So we're going to see Marcel at our May 6th seminar too. Correct, Marcel?
Yes, sir. You will see me there. So if you're joining and you're in the Massachusetts area, we would love to see you.
Yep.
Yes.
That's a great point, Dave. May 6th is our spring forum at the Connor Center in Dover, Mass. And Dave in particular has done a great job. We've got multiple panels. You'll see the posts and information about it as we've released different panels. We have a workforce management panel, a QA panel, and we just recently released a leadership panel, all kind of with that flavoring and tone of AI and its impact in terms of the world that's out there. So something to keep in mind in terms of events that are coming up. But this has been a great conversation, Marcel, and great information. Obviously, from the comments, a lot of good stuff, a lot of amens.
This group needs it. Trust me. I know. Workforce management
Yes.
is definitely you need some tough skin to work in that group, and I applaud everyone who's doing it in today's environment. It is a challenge. So kudos to all.
Here, here.
All right,
Thank you all
guys.
for joining.
Thanks, guys. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marcel.
Take care, guys. Bye.